that's one thing that makes grief really difficult. The regrets that you feel from those moments, the calls you wish you had made, the trips you wish you went on. So my Miss USA year was not what I had envisioned. One thing about grief is that you feel bad when you're happy. You feel like you have no right to experience joy. There's something about seeing someone fight for their life that changes you. We start to question, why is someone that is such a good human being going through so much suffering?
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Good Grief. Today, we're going to be talking with Deshauna Barber over in St. Louis, where Kaylee was actually born. Deshauna is former Miss USA. She is an Army vet and lost her mother. And so we're going to be talking about that journey, the mental health side of it, the grief, the depression, the anxiety, everything that comes along with that, but then also the pressures that come with holding such titles like Miss USA. Something that I've never heard spoken about too publicly before. So without further ado, I want to welcome Deshauna to the show. Hey,
thank you,
it's
Ryan.
Great to have you. It's been so cool just hanging out, and thanks for jumping on. Like, you've got so many things. You got your hands in so many different areas. You run your own podcast, Sour Lost Sweet Lessons. You're traveling all over the country. What's the flavor of this week for you currently?
Today's a little bit of a relaxation day. This week, I'm actually going to be filming more episodes of Sour Lost Sweet Lessons, but that's really most of my week. I've got a few meetings and that's just about it. But next week, it gets really hectic. I've got a lot of travel coming up. As you mentioned, I'm a motivational speaker, so I'm constantly just traveling the world, trying to empower people and uplift them through my stories and my experiences. So it's really awesome to be able to be on a podcast that does the same thing. So thank you again for having me.
You're welcome. Hey, we should get you down to Australia. Have you guys been out here?
No, I haven't been to Australia. It's on my bucket list, though. I would love to come out.
Let's do it. Do you like the warm weather, the beaches? Are you a fan of that?
Oh yeah. But you all have massive spiders. Am I crazy? Did I make that up? Don't you have massive spiders?
Oh, okay. Yes, we do. Maybe you don't want to come to our house, because when we first bought this home, like we found these spiders like as big as the palm of our hand.
Oh my Lord.
And like every other day we're finding these spiders, and we've probably just lost so many listeners right now, right?
Yeah.
But we had to put this strip under our front door because they were just coming in the door. And we've recently had snakes and all sorts of things. So we'll protect you. Don't worry. We promise we'll protect you.
I'm going to need that protection because I have a massive bug phobia. So that is the only thing that would prevent me from coming to Australia is you all's spiders and your bugs. That's the only thing that will prevent me, but I'll get through that fear because I know that you all are known to be very hospitable. And of course, just have the most beautiful beaches, and just to be surrounded 360 by the ocean is really beautiful. So it's definitely on my bucket list. Got to make it happen.
Yeah, we'll double date that that trip up for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm really grateful to have you here. I think this conversation is one. It's just super, for me, unusual, like to have your notoriety status, but in such a place that is unfamiliar territory to me. I don't know any Miss USAs. You're the first, and so you're my favorite. And over here in Australia, like, it's not, I don't know if it's televised, like, because maybe I just don't follow it. But it's a big thing there in the States, right? Like, and from what I understand, this has been a big part of your growing up as well. Tell us about, I guess, what that whole world means and is like.
It's a very interesting world, actually. So, it has its stereotypes, of course, that it is very superficial and that it objectifies women. But, my experience with pageantry and all the women that I have had the honor of being able to compete against, they're all very intelligent, beautiful inside and out. And it is a organization that you can use to promote your platform, your brand, and the causes and your philanthropic causes that are important to you. So for me, I was very excited to be the first soldier to win Miss USA, and I was able to utilize my role to be able to talk about some of the harder parts of being a service member, to talk about post traumatic stress disorder, the suicide rate within the military, the different abuses that happen to women and men in service, and also to be able to talk about the lack of attention to disability claims, making sure that the service members that are suffering from trauma have access to the resources that were promised to them. So I loved being Miss USA because there were conversations that I don't know if you've seen a beauty queen have prior to. So it was really nice to be able to show that those two worlds coming together and being able to utilize that platform. In terms of it being popular, it's pretty popular. I definitely think that it was more popular prior to social media, I would say.
Is
But
that
I
right?
definitely
Interesting.
think that it is still has its relevancy in America, but we could probably do a little bit better at showcasing it.
Okay. And I mean, you became Miss USA 2016. And so,
Mhm.
like, social media was like still, it was around, but it wasn't like it is now, right?
Mhm.
Were you able to still utilize social media back then, in regards to the campaigns and the passions that you just mentioned? Like,
A little bit, a little bit, but I love that I came in at the time that I did because we were still, as an organization, on such a massive pedestal where I got opportunities that I don't know if it's necessarily offered now. Now that there's a such thing as an influencer and a content creator, and these are the
sure.
individuals that have the power of their platforms. I think that it has given access to individuals that don't necessarily need a crown to be able to promote their brands and promote the things that are important to them and become stars in their own way. So I think it's a beautiful thing because I believe that visibility is a human right. I feel like we all should have our own platforms and the opportunity to be able to promote the things that we care about. I don't think it should require you to be a superstar or require you to be a movie star or a singer to be able to
Sure.
be considered important in somebody's world. So I think that at the time that I came in, it was really beautiful. It was an awesome experience.
Mm.
I was able to launch my speaking career off of the back of my crown. But I do think that as an organization, I'm hoping that they'll continue to find ways to stay relevant and to be able to promote the title holders that win.
Yes, super important. And I really want to know, how does uh, military service and beauty pageants, how does that world marry up? To me, that is just the most polar opposites. And yet here you are. Just help me out here.
It's so opposing, and that's what's so
Yeah,
hilarious about it. I think that that's why people found my reign to be so fascinating because, of course, people have their stereotypes about female soldiers. I don't know if they necessarily assume that we're feminine. I don't know if they assume that we wear heels or that we like to wear dresses or do makeup or do our hair. And so many of us are women, but we're women that believe in serving our country. So for
mm,
me, it was easy to see the two sides of the world because I grew up in a military family. My father, mother, sister, and brother are all Army veterans. So it
sure.
was a part of, my life and my lifestyle. I've always grown up, on a military base or near a military base. It was something that was very common for me. So being a service member was not ironic in any way, but I definitely think that pageantry became a different world because of the fact that I grew up in such a militant household. I wasn't necessarily playing with dolls and playing with makeup and getting dressed up. I was the girl outside building forts and riding bikes for miles so we could go jump in the lake. And,
Oh, so
I've
good.
always been someone that was very active. And when I was introduced to pageantry, which actually came for me very late in life in comparison to most pageant people, I didn't start competing in pageants until I was 19, which is very
Wow.
rare. Most people start in their teens or in their childhood age. So I was pretty late to the game. But when I did my very first pageant, I fell in love with it because it gave me a chance to get in touch with the side of myself that I didn't know existed. I had no clue what it really felt like to embrace femininity, and to embrace that piece of myself that was sophisticated and classy, and kind of just drop all of that toughness, I guess, and just really be able
Sure.
to embrace that side of myself that I believe to be very beautiful. And it was an awesome
Wow.
experience to jump into it.
Oh, that is incredible. I didn't realize, yeah, it started so late for you.
Mhm.
That's why you and my wife are going to get along too, building forts, riding bikes,
Yeah.
jumping in lakes. Like, it's going to be so cool. Um, so, okay, so 19, you got into pageantry. When or what age did you serve in military from and to?
I was in the military I joined at 17 and I got out when I was 30. So I did 11 years. How old was I? I got out in 2022. So I also want to preface this by saying I don't know how it works outside of America, but
Sure.
when I started my service, I signed a military contract, and the military contract aligned with my school. So I spent
Hmm.
4.5 years at my university while balancing ROTC, which is
Yeah, I've got no idea what that is.
yeah, it's kind of like your entry level as an officer into the military.
Okay.
So
Yep.
instead of going through basic training and entering immediately, we go through 4 years of training. And
Sure.
that 4 years of training is in alignment with your university.
Okay.
And then once you
And so that,
graduate from your university, you are immediately plunged into the military. So if we're
got it.
talking from after college, it was 11 years.
Hmm.
I was commissioned at 21 and then I got out at 32.
Okay.
And it was yeah, it was
Just
a long time. So I just got out in 2022. I've only been a veteran or out of service for 2 years.
Yeah, well,
Mhm.
I mean, not that I'm from the US, but thank you for your service. And that's so wild that the pageantry and the service overlapped at a similar time.
Yeah.
There wasn't, so that's very interesting. Okay, um, let's dive into, I guess, your grief story
Mhm.
and just tell us about your mum and the woman that she is. Yeah, and how you were raised.
So my mom was an incredible person. She was tough as nails. She was actually an auto mechanic and a bus
Oh,
driver. Yeah, so
wow.
back in the day before she passed away, she was the person that I would call if I had an issue with my car. She was
So
the
not your dad,
person.
you'd call your mum.
Yes, I never call my dad. I don't know if he even knows how to, anything under the hood, but my mom, I
Come
remember the
on.
days growing up where she would be in our garage rebuilding an engine from scratch. And I
Wow.
mean, she was just the most unique and incredible person. And she taught me what strength looks like. And she inspired me in so many ways to be persistent in my goals. What most people don't know is that although I started pageantry at 19, I didn't win until I was 26. And I spent 7 years consistently competing. What
Sure.
people may not understand about US pageants, but specifically about this pageant system with USA or Miss USA, you have to win your state first.
Right.
So I was competing for 7 years just trying to win my state competition so that I could go on to compete at Miss USA. So when you look at the Miss USA competition, you have, Miss Idaho, Miss Missouri, Miss New York, all of these
Sure. That makes
states.
sense.
Hmm. And they all had to win their state competition first. And you're going against between maybe 15 or 300 girls. It just depends on how big your state is. So I was competing for 7 years before I even could win my state title so that I could go on to compete for Miss USA. And she was the one that would come to every single pageant. And no matter how epically I lost, she always said, "Your day is coming." She always would tell me, like, one day you're going to win. One day. I'm like, "Okay, mom." Like, we'll see. Because after a while, you just start losing hope and things just
Yeah.
become very difficult to maintain your confidence. But she was always the type that kept pushing me and pushing me to not give up. So In 2014, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I was very young, I must say. I think I was maybe 23, 24 at the time of her diagnosis. And it's not that I didn't take it seriously, it's my assumption that she was going to beat it. And I
Mm.
think that that's one thing that makes grief really difficult. It is the regrets that you feel from those moments, the calls you wish you had made, the trips you wish you went on. So when her diagnosis came down, I was distraught, but I was also very avoidant at the same time. I was avoidant of the realities of
Mm.
what this might mean. And in my brain, it just kept telling me that you've got plenty of time. She's going to beat it. And I just don't know if it was delusion or if it was just me being avoidant. I'm not sure. But I stayed focused on pageantry. I just kept competing, kept competing, kept competing. And she kept showing up. And I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time, and she lived in North Carolina, probably like a maybe 3.5, 4 hour drive from my place to her place. And
Sure.
I deal a lot with regret. And because there were times in which I felt like I should have driven down to see her, I felt like I should have spent more time with her. But I had locked into this goal of winning Miss USA one day and locked into this goal of being successful. And I was also in a very toxic relationship with a somebody that I'm not going to diagnose him, but I think he should be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder.
Sure.
But this individual did a great job at making me feel bad for all the time that we spent apart. So
Whoa.
I also had to deal with
Yeah.
the frustrations of being in a relationship with someone that lacked empathy and that always made me feel like I should be ashamed for any time we felt apart. So because of that, that
That's the
also
last thing. That is
contributed.
the last thing you need when you're trying to think about your mom. You've got goals and hopes and dreams. That's the last thing. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes, it's one of those things that really plays into the importance of choosing the right partner, because
Mm.
in moments of crisis, in moments of possible loss, and in moments of grieving, your partner can make the process either better or worse.
Yeah.
And I think with this particular gentleman, we had been together for 3.5 years. The way in which his abuse increased during the time in which I was grieving, because also what again, I'm not diagnosing, but what also happened is that because I'm grieving and sad and concerned about someone else, that makes a narcissist jealous in the most evil, deceptive way. And their way of trying to get attention from you, or at least the way he would try to get attention from me, is to try to make me more upset than I already was. So just creating problems and things along those lines that would somehow be about him, or you didn't do the dishes, or you didn't cook. But I've been crying all
Sure.
day, grieving my mother.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
that's a whole nother story. But
And can I just pause to say, I just want to reflect on your mum here for a second, and you mentioning that feeling of regret, which
yeah,
so familiar for me and so many of our listeners as well. However, I just want to point out that your mum championed you, and she championed you towards that goal of Miss USA. And she's the one saying, you're going to win it. You're going to get there. You're going to do it, And so without knowing her at all, like, man, she had all hopes and dreams, and she saw that coming to fruition. And, so I just want to say, you regretting not driving those 4 hours sometimes, she was behind you all of the way, and maybe that's easier for me to see from this side, like hearing you tell that story. But she just sounds like the biggest champion of you, which is a beautiful thing.
thank you. That's so sweet of you to say, and it's important that I have to remind myself, because I think that when you are carrying regret on your back, it's very hard to get it off you. It's very hard to get rid of that weight. And what I did was, it's one of the reasons why I became a speaker, was because of the fact that I wanted to encourage people to appreciate people while they're here, to love
Yeah.
on people and pour into people while they're here, because we just don't know what tomorrow looks like. And I think I say this all the time, but when I think I'm a better person since she passed away, and that sounds horrible to say, but it people always talk about the evolution of your internal self. When you experience trauma and grief, it changes you. And I think that I was somebody that took life and time for granted before she passed away. And I think that in an unfortunate way, I needed a massive reality check to be able to understand the importance of love and life.
Mm.
And when I won Miss USA, it was in June of 2016, and my mom passed away on August 20th of 2016.
A
So
few months later.
yes, just maybe 2.5 months at most later. So my Miss USA year was not what I had envisioned, of course, because you feel, one thing about grief is that you feel bad when you're happy. You feel like you have no right to experience joy. The moments in which I'd be walking, let's say on a red carpet, and I see a celebrity that I'm, crazy about or obsessed with or love so much, and I have a moment of joy, I pull those reins back, because I'm like, no, you can't be happy because your mom has passed away. So it's also dealing with the shame of happiness. And that's another thing that I talk about in my speeches. I know that we had talked about at the beginning, just the discussions of mental health.
All right, small tech difficulty, but we're back. The internet and technology can't stop us in this grief conversation. You were just talking about the moments where you feel a sense of joy rising up, and then that good feeling being squashed immediately by I shouldn't feel good, that shame, that guilt that's attached to that. Were there any specific moments that come to mind where you're like, "Ooh, I'm feeling it rise up," and then it got squashed?
Yes. I think, as a pageant girl, I love other pageant girls. And I met Pia Wurtzbach for the first time, and she was Miss Universe 2015, and she was actually my roommate. What a lot of people don't
Ooh,
know is when you win Miss USA, they immediately fly you to New York, and that's where they have the Miss USA, Miss Universe apartment. And it's a 3-bedroom apartment in New York City. Miss Universe is in one room, and then Miss USA is in the other room, and the third room is your house manager that's there to monitor you. So I just
wow.
remember meeting her for the first time, and my mom had not passed away by then, but she was in hospice at the time. So I knew that
Sure.
eventually, that it was approaching fast. And I just remember seeing Pia and just being like freaking out in excitement, like one of my idols, one of my favorite Miss Universes. And for a moment, I smiled and I felt joy that was real, because obviously when you're in these types of roles, you're smiling constantly, but your inner body is not actually feeling any of that joy. This was a moment in which I actually felt genuine joy. And after about 5 seconds of feeling it, I'm like, oh no, mom's on hospice. She's dying. We need to be focused in on grieving and mourning my mom. So it is one of those. Grieving is such a strange experience, and I
Yeah.
had to keep reminding myself that she does not want me to live a life of unhappiness. I think that that's the one thing that really I tried to instill in myself, didn't really work as best it could, but it's one of the things that I talk about in my speeches is, give yourself permission to find happiness in the moments that you can find it, because grieving is
That's
so
great.
you're so spiritually engulfed in the grief that it's very easy to drown in it. So I always say in my speeches that when you're feeling depression or you're feeling like you're in a mental health crisis, to never let yourself drown, to continue to swim until you find some land to stand on. And I think that during that year, I was also in an avoidant uh, part of my life, where I didn't want to listen to her favorite songs. I didn't want to look at pictures of her. everything that I could do to avoid and face those emotions, I did. And I think that that's one of the worst things you can do, is try to pause or hold off on experiencing the grief. You have to embrace it. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I was very attracted to your podcast page, specifically the one on Instagram, is the Tyler Perry clip that you posted. And
Yeah.
Tyler Perry was talking to a young lady, and she got emotional. She's like, "I'm so sorry." He's like, "No, no, 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 no. Feel what you're feeling right now." And I thought to myself, man, I wish someone had told me that in 2016, because
Right.
I really needed to feel it and not avoid it.
Have you lost anyone close to you since your mom? And have you had that opportunity then to feel those emotions in the moment rather than avoiding?
No, I haven't. I've lost grandparents, and of course, very close to me and love them very much. They weren't necessarily someone that was as close as my mom, of course. So I have not
Sure.
had another close death before. Not to that capacity, before
Yeah.
her or after her. I've lost
Yeah.
friends, I've lost aunts and uncles and distant cousins and grandparents. But to the level of which that relationship was, no, I haven't experienced it yet. And I'm hoping God will give me some grace to give me a little bit more time before I have to
Mm.
face that type of grief again.
No, I totally relate. And same for myself in my situation as well. My dad and no one before or after
Mm,
quite like that. And I'm also praying that God would give me grace when those moments come, because they are. And just because we've gone through it once, doesn't mean, hey, we've got the badge and we're prepared a second and a third time.
right.
Um, we're not that naive, are we? Like, we're not that naive. I don't want to be. So let's talk about um, that mental health side. You touched on that. We were talking about it off air, especially from the Miss USA pageant, world. You mentioned to me the one of the girls who happened to win ended up a few years later taking, or dying by suicide.
Correct.
Can you just talk to us about that element?
Yes. So pageantry is a very brutal place. It's very brutal. And
I can only imagine. Like, I don't have to put on a heel to realize that would be a brutal place.
yes, it is. It's unfortunate. And you know what has only inflamed it is social media. It's
Sure.
giving people access to criticize you and have direct access to speaking to you in the most dehumanized way. And my friend Chesley Christ, she was Miss USA 2019. She committed suicide in 2022 by jumping from her high-rise New York apartment. And it shook the pageant community. I don't know if we had experienced that type of tragedy before, but I know
Sure.
for me, it reminded me that, wow, even at the mountain's peak of success, even when you, from the outside looking in, you look like you have it all, there's so many internal battles that you can be experiencing. I can't speak to what was her reasoning or what was the source of her mental health struggle, but I will say that I know that pageantry could not have helped it. I do know that.
Right.
I'm not saying that it's the cause. Only she would be able to speak to that. But I will say that I know it didn't help. I know it didn't
Mm.
improve it. I know it didn't, be a ointment or a medication for it. I know that it could only be a contributing factor to the reason why mental health and pageantry is something that needs to be recognized, and it's something that needs to be considered as a community. We had a Miss USA 2023. Her name is Noelia Voigt, and she's a very good friend of mine. She was Miss USA, and she actually relinquished her title because of her mental health struggles, because
Wow.
of how toxic and
Mm.
negatively impacting the crown had been on her mental health. She was someone that talks about she had never experienced mental health or depression before, but as soon as she won Miss USA, her mental and emotional health just deteriorated, and it just really
And what
speaks to the impact of the crown.
Yeah. And what was your personal journey like when, I mean, obviously your mum was in hospice at the time, so
Yeah.
that's having an impact. But what was the, I guess, the weight of the crown like? Could you separate the two in terms of the toxicity or the demand or the pressures of Miss USA aside from the grief that you were going through mentally?
They were a little bit separate. If anything, I think that the grief emotionally shielded me from the social media bullies and backlash that I was experiencing. I had to deal with a
And
lot.
why was that? Why do you think the grief shielded you? I think that's such a fascinating statement to make.
It's interesting because I think that I was so distracted by my sorrow with my mom that I didn't have time to think about the pageant fans that were calling me a monkey up and down my Instagram account. I was so intertwined into thinking about my mother and the loss that I had experienced that the racism and the colorism that I was experiencing as Miss USA kind of fell to the back burner. Did it hurt? Yes. There was no way, there's no words to describe how much it pained me to see the hate that came from my reign from people that I assumed would support it. But I think that I was more exposed to racism and colorism that I ever knew existed in my life. I think it took winning Miss USA to really know the depths of which it was ingrained in society's perspective of what beauty looks like. So
Sure.
in my brain, I saw it, I see it, I understand it, but I don't have time to think about that right now. I'm focused,
Yeah.
on my grief and on my mom. And it pushed me to a way of, again, being avoidant and just shielding it and just blocking people anytime they put a monkey emoji or that poop emoji on my Instagram comments. I just hit the block button and move on. And I think that the pageantry space is very, like I told you, is very brutal. I One
Mm.
thing that really shocked me is the naiveness that came from people's interactions with me. I'll give you an example. I had a dress sponsor, and this dress sponsor, she sponsored, or the company sponsored my Miss USA gown that I competed in. And I mailed them the dress back because they wanted to showcase it in their storefront by saying, this is the winning gown of Miss USA. Fine, no
Sure.
big
That
deal.
makes sense. Yeah.
But
Totally.
I forgot to send the earrings that they custom created with the gown. Wasn't thinking about it, completely focused on other things. I get a text message a week after my mom died, and the text message said, "Hey, so sorry to hear about your mom. I am praying for you." About those earrings. And I remember thinking to myself, these people are
What?
psychotic. And
Right.
I remember, and normally I am the type that is just choosing peace, that makes the decision to not be the angry black woman, right? So my goal during my time as Miss USA was to not be that. And in truth, I think it actually pushed me into being more of a doormat, more than it, and I was no longer protecting myself. So in this moment, I was so fed up with the lack of empathy that people were showing me that I went smooth off on this lady. I said, my mom just died a week ago, and you're texting me about some earrings. Like, let's think about that. You're texting me
Mm.
about some earrings, and my mom died a week ago. And it really just showed me the fact that our grief is not everyone's grief. that what we're feeling is so disconnected from everyone else that they have a tendency to lose sight of grief or of your grief so quickly, because a lot of people are focused on themselves, and a lot of people have never experienced that level of grief. I realized that the people that did the best at supporting me in losing my mom have likely lost a parent before and understand the level of pain that comes with it. And I think that that's one thing that really frustrated me is I got a chance to see the real true shortcomings of natural human behavior, that we are
Yeah.
really very much as humans self-absorbed and focused on ourselves and tone deaf, and we
Mm-hmm.
lose sight of the struggles of other people because we're so embodied in ourselves that we forget the level of pain that other people are experiencing. And I think, like I said, I was likely one of those people before my mom died. So I also had to understand the depths of grace that's necessary. If I cut off every single person that did a terrible job at supporting me when my mom died, I likely would have two or three people left in my life. So grace had to be
Right?
forced on me as well.
Oh, man, you just went there like on so many levels, far out. I'm here just jotting down words. I'm like, I've got to circle back to that. Like, oh, I just need to take a breath because what you've just almost covered the whole spectrum, like
Yeah.
in a few short minutes. And I've got to say thank you. So many people right now are going to be resonating with this at such a core level. Like the heart rate rises, you feel like your hairs stand up, you're like, you feel justice like rising on the inside of you, you feel the pain. Whoa, where do I start? First of all, I want to say, I'm sorry you experienced such racism. Like,
Yeah.
only people who have experienced it, like grief, understand what that's like. Not that this is about me, but as soon as the Twin Towers came down, I was in grade 6 or so. No beard or anything then. The next day, I was called Osama bin Laden at my school. And
Oh,
so, like, so from a, like, I'm feeling for you so much.
yeah.
I think, second of all, that grief shield that you mentioned is so powerful, and you don't, you underestimate its power until you face other, not tragedies, you face other mountains or enemies um, in life that you only look back and you go, wow, I was actually shielded through pain and loss, which I believe is part of God's grace in grief and in this, messy assortment of emotions that we can't understand until we're able, you're 8 years, I'm 12 years down the track, you can start to dissect some of those life moments. I think also, the earrings thing, like, that's like a perfect example of grief brain. You would have returned them. I thought you were going to say that they text you and said you stole them. I'm thankful that they didn't accuse you of that. But
Mhm.
like, our brains just, the wiring of our brains, that's such a simple thing that now you would easily, the dress and the earrings, they go together. But in that moment, you're taking care of your mum, you're processing all of these things, and that's the most furthest from your thought process of like getting that back to them.
Right.
And I think that's what grief brain is. And you said then also that people just don't understand because they haven't experienced it, and they just get back to reality. And like, not even in a space of an hour or a day, it's in the space of two sentences in a text message of like, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, can you just do this? Whoa. Like, whoa. So thanks for sharing that story. Very, very powerful. You mentioned grace then, and you also said earlier that you're a better person now because of grief. I feel exactly the same way. Often when people hear that, they're like, how is that possible? But the empathy that I have now for people going through loss is has skyrocketed. It's never coming down. The patience that I have for people, and I'm not trying to blow my own horn here, but you're the same, and I know that because once you've walked in these shoes, you can truly feel for somebody else, and you can allow grace. Oh, they're late to hanging out, going to the cafe. Oh, they forgot my birthday present. You know, all of these little things. We can have grace for people because we understand. Um, what do you feel? Is it grace or is it something else? Has there been a superpower for you that has really come out of losing your mum?
I think my love for life has changed. My really taking not taking anything for granted anymore. And then also I feel like I've become a little lighter. Um People talk about this all the time, where we talk about how prior to, the things we would get mad at, the things that would frustrate us, the things that were minuscule from most angles, somehow we no longer feel frustrated easily anymore. Because I remember I used to be someone that would get so frustrated over the smallest things. But I think there's something about seeing someone fight for their life, legitimately fight to exist. There's something about that that changes you. And it puts things into perspective that we really have to stop complaining about the smallest things. I remember I used to kind of be somewhat of a drama queen, someone that would just be, I don't know, I wouldn't say I was unbearable. I still felt like I was a good human being, but I just don't think that I understood what peace really looks like. There is a peace that I feel because I feel so blessed. Um, and I no longer take God's favor for granted. And I think prior to her death, I took everything for granted. I took life for granted. I took health for granted, the
Mm.
roof over my head for granted, like everything. I almost feel like I felt deeply privileged, and I didn't recognize the privilege of life. And I think that that's another thing that death does, is it reminds you just how valuable life is and how quickly it can be taken from you. And also, there's something about suffering in others that warms you, humanizes you, and puts you in a position in which there is a love and an empathy that has grown into your existence and has grown into your spirit. So I have just become a nicer person. I've become a more giving and generous person. The level at which I'm willing to donate my time to people that are suffering, or to marginalized communities, people that are less fortunate than I am. I am 10 times more generous now than I've ever been in my life. And
Wow.
I think it
Whoa.
has a lot to do with seeing my mom even be so gracious in her last moments. I remember her very last few hours. People don't understand that when you're dying and when you're going through pre-death experience, you're kind of in and out of consciousness. And the moments in which she would wake up from consciousness, she'd be praying, and she'd be thanking God, and just thank you, Lord, and help me, and just, she knew that she was dying, and she still leaned in on her faith in those last hours. And it just reminded me of the strength of her faith. And we all know this when it comes to death, that we start to question God, and we start to question our faith, and we start to question, why is someone that is such a good human being going through so much suffering? I don't, and you find fault in the fairness of it. So I've never thought
And
that death
have
was
you,
fair. And sorry, go ahead.
mm, yeah, no, just on that, have you, because I know that's a very, very poignant question. What answer have you heard from God? Have you come to around that? Why such a good person like your mum, a faith filled person, would come across cancer and pass?
I don't know if I have my answer just yet. And I know that sounds bad. And I know that it's been 8 years, and I'm
It
someone
doesn't
that's.
sound bad. That doesn't sound bad at all. No.
I'm glad you say that because I always feel bad when people are like, well, how do you see God and mercy and stuff like that? And I don't know if I have the answers just yet. I don't know, why. I guess I question not God's control over suffering, but who gets mercy and who doesn't. When does it kick in? When doesn't? When does it
Mm.
not? And I just realized that sometimes healing does not happen in life form or in physical form. That's what I've had to as a way for me to seek understanding is that sometimes their healing is experienced in afterlife. So when I'm asking God to please heal my mother, I'm asking God to rid my mother of this cancer that may not come in physical form, and that God's mercy does not always happen in bestie. I am so sorry. Literally
Is that your
nobody
bestie
calls.
calling? Did that say
That is my
bestie?
best friend calling me, interrupting my video. Oh my gosh. Okay. I put everything
Can
on
you
do not disturb.
that's no, that is so funny. Can you call her out for a second and we'll leave it in the podcast? Can you call out your bestie
Yeah,
right
you can
now?
call her out. Brittany, you need to stop calling me. Okay. Lord,
Brittany, you heard it first, Brittany. Stop calling Deshauna when we're
stop
talking
calling
about
me.
deep things.
We're gonna talk about deep stuff here.
Um,
But that actually
man,
reminds
hey,
me why she's one of my best friends is
tell
her
me.
support and her love. Interesting enough, when my mom passed away, she was deployed to Afghanistan. She's military as well. And let me tell you, and I'm sure you know, Ryan, that death shows people's faults and it shows people's genuine talents and abilities. And I loved my best friend a lot before my mom's death, but boy, did I love and appreciate her 10 times more after my mom passed away. The way in which she
Seriously, yeah.
showed up without having to be there in person was a beautiful experience. And I think one thing about death is that it because I gave grace to individuals that did not necessarily know how to show up for me, I still recognized that this is not a relationship that I'm going to keep too close to me, especially in hard times. But I do think that it improved, heightened, and increased the growth of my relationships with individuals that knew how to show up and
Mm.
that showed up in the way that I needed them the most. So I didn't lose friends necessarily, but I definitely built stronger relationships with the ones that knew the best way to handle death in my life
So
at the
powerful.
time.
Yeah. And man, how grateful we are for people like that. Not everybody has that experience that friends know how to show up. I heard from, I think it was maybe Rick Warren, this great like 3 point, you know, instruction manual for supporting someone through grief. Show up, shut up,
Mm,
and sit, and I was just like, man, that is
love that.
so good. I was like, come on, why didn't I know that, 10, 20 years ago, helping others through, walking others through grief.
Yeah.
Before, like, as we start to sort of, man, I could chat to you, like, we're going to have to do this again because there is so much
Yeah, we need a
more
part
here that we
two.
haven't even,
I could talk for days.
yeah.
We need a part two.
Oh yeah. Like, yeah, we need part two. So if you're watching or listening, wherever you're watching, comment below part two and we'll make it happen. But I just want to, I really love hearing just your heart open about the things around your relationship with God and your faith. And sounds like you really grew up in a faith-filled household. Tragedy being one of those things we don't expect, anticipate, and then it comes. How is your faith strengthened now? And like, has there been a verse, a song, something that you've clung to during that?
So faith has definitely gotten stronger. I think I've always been someone that just loves music, and Maverick City has easily been one of the
Yes.
one of the groups that have brought me closer in my faith and really revisiting my faith. Because I will say that after my mom passed away, I stepped back from my faith strong. Like I took 10 steps back because,
Sure.
I'm hoping that God doesn't fault me for that. But I had a lot of things to figure out and things to understand that I just could not understand it. And I think that that's one thing that I love about God's patience is by recognizing that I know you don't feel like you have the answers and I'm going to give you the space to find them and come back to me when you're ready. And it took maybe a year or two after my mom's passing for me to really reconnect back with my faith and in my
Sure.
relationship with God. I think in this moment, probably Maverick City's Gyra is always going to be my go-to song. I played that song out,
Oh yeah.
and there's not a note in that song that I don't know, but I think that that song probably has been one of the songs I listen to most. Uh,
Mm.
and what's also kind of rebuilt my faith is my marriage. Uh, I've held it
Wow.
together this entire time,
We're
and
gonna
now
get.
I'm about to lose it. Okay. Huh. I I see God in my husband,
Mm.
and his love is so beautiful. And in truth, he's not my mom or anything, but there is a love of a partner. Man, I almost had it. The love
Plenty
of
of.
a healthy partner has been so life changing for me. And I think, me and you talked about it earlier, where I know toxic love. I know
Mm.
toxic relationships. I know relationships that are filled with disrespect and unhealthy activity. My husband has shown up in a way in which I see God through him. He's not a perfect man, but he's as close as I'm going to get, let me tell you. But
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
his love is so beautiful, and it reminds me of God's love and God's favor. And
Mm.
it reminds me of what it feels like to access a human that, although has not experienced the level of death that I've experienced or the level of trauma that I've experienced, that the power of his commitment to me is to love me through all my worst parts and through all my worst days. And it shows God's grace. Um, so I think that that's one thing that has also helped restore my faith is the love and the covenant of marriage, what it has shown me
Mm.
and what it has built in me. And I think that being married, that there's a lot of forgiveness and grace that has to happen in marriage. And it has built up like the patience that I see that he has for me, especially in my grief. It just really goes to show the mercy that I have experienced and the mercy that I try to offer others in their human
Mm.
moments, especially those that are experiencing trauma or grief. So
Whoa. Thank you for going there. Thank you for the tears, man. Um, he sounds like a keeper. Like
he is.
I think he should stay.
he's
um,
he's got to stick around for me because he's
you
definitely
got you guys have
nice.
I love you. I love you guys seeing your vibe together on camera on the podcast, and man, I'm so pumped to hang out, whether it's us in the States, whether it's you here in Oz. You
Yeah.
actually made me think of one of our dear friends, Christine Wren. She's been a minister for many years and walked people through grief for like 25 years. On a recent workshop that we held in our Good Grief Club, she actually posed this question that I've never heard before. And she said, asking God, who do you want to be to me?
Hmm.
And I had to ask her, like, what do you mean by that question? She said, who do you want to be to me? She said, you can ask God in this moment, God, do you need to be my father? Do you need to be
Hmm.
my mother, my brother, my son? Who do you want to be to me in this moment? And God can really meet us there. And you just reminded me of that by seeing that in your husband in terms of the opposite way that he reflects God to you. And I think that is not that has to be one of the biggest blessings that we can receive in a spouse and a husband or a wife, right? So,
Yeah.
man, thank you for sharing that. We'll have to get him on the show maybe potentially as well. Like maybe both of
Yeah.
you guys can jump on for part 2. That'd be cool.
Oh, he would love that.
Oh, so cool. Hey, as we wrap up, I just want to know, final question. How do you love to remember your mum the best? Is there a way that you honor her or cherish her? Is there something you do, you eat, you listen to, go to?
So she was a music girly. So I feel like my taste in music is so broad because of the types of genres and things that she exposed us to. So she passed away on August 20th, 2016. So every August 20th, I do the same thing. I go through and I watch particular movies. Y'all may not have seen these in Australia, but there's a movie called Shallow Hal.
Oh, yeah. Come on now. Come
Okay,
on
that makes
now.
you feel good. It's with Gwyneth Paltrow and Jack Black and
Yeah,
Tony
and Anthony
Robbins is in
Robbins
it.
features. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic movie. The reason why I watched that movie is because it's one of my mom's favorite movies, and she loved the
Hmm.
soundtrack. So I always go through. I
Okay.
watch that movie, and then I watch a movie called The Five Heartbeats, which is about a Black American music group from the '60s, and they're going through the
Right.
civil rights movement and all these things. And she loved that album too. So I watched the movie, I'll listen to the album, and then I'll watch the next movie and listen to the soundtrack and all of these things. And I listen to all of her favorite songs. She loved crab legs, so I go through and I eat crab legs. And it's kind of my thing that I like to do by myself. So my husband, I might do it while he's at work or something like that, or he'll step away to go to the gym. Like I find my moments, or, I'll get a hotel room and kind of be to myself. I'm still someone that when I grieve, I like to be alone and go through the motions by myself.
Sure.
But
Sure.
it is my go-to way of grieving. And I think that
Wow.
allows me a moment to cry and experience the
Yeah.
sorrow. And allow the emotions to run. I laugh, I cry, I scream, I yell, and then I sleep, and I go through all these waves of experiences. And by the time I hit midnight in the next day, I'm okay. So
Mm,
yeah, that's kind
wow.
of my routine.
Whoa. Oh man, thank you. I haven't heard someone share such a thought out process like that, especially on that day. Some people really avoid that day, the day they died. Some people lean into it. So thanks for sharing that. Deshauna, you're the best. Thanks for hanging out. You've been a blessing to me and so many others that are going to be listening to this. Let's do it again.
Yes, let's do it. Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. This has been incredible. I haven't done a talk like this before when it comes to talking about my mom, but I think that it honors her and it keeps her memory alive. And I hope that it helps your followers and your viewers be able to get through their grief experiences. So thank you so much for blessing me with the opportunity to speak.
No, thank you. And it's just one of those grief firsts. So I'm glad that we could be a part of it. Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Man, what a blessing. I just want this conversation to go on for hours. I wish Deshauna and her husband were in the room. We'd get some crab legs out. We'll get some Sri Lankan curries, some French croissants for my wife, and we just all celebrate our loved ones. But I hope I bet there's been tons of gold for you in this podcast. So if it's been helpful for you, all we'd ask is that you might rate the podcast. That would be amazing. Or just share it with somebody else. Maybe they've lost their mum. This would be the perfect episode for them as well. Until next time, big love from Kaylee, myself, and little nearly 6-month-old Nazare. We'll see you soon. Ciao.